Good evening, I'm Sheridan Morley, with you through till midnight, with the arts programme including Tim West and Irene Worth after the news at 10. But starting in half an hour, there's a rare chance to hear Mame, Jerry Herman's Broadway musical classic, in a brand new broadcast for Radio 2. Mame, now starring Julia Mackenzie, David Kernan and Libby Morris, was, back in 1966, the Broadway hit with which the composer immediately followed his triumphant Hello, Dolly. It brought Angela Lansbury back to the musical stage and to her greatest theatrical stardom, while in London the role of the zany aunt was played by Ginger Rogers and on film by Lucille Ball. But it's the Lansbury stage version that we recall tonight, with the lady herself and Jerry Herman both joining us on the line from America to talk about the original making of Mame. So, Jerry, this whole project began, I would imagine, as a vehicle for Lansbury herself.
I didn't write Mame for Angela. I wrote it because Lawrence and Lee, the authors of Anti-Mame, took me to lunch one day and said, how would you like to make a musical out of Anti-Mame? And I didn't have to say, I'll let you know tomorrow or I'll call my agent. I just went, wow, because I knew that that material was musical material and that I'd have a wonderful time finding songs for her. And of course, I don't know if you've ever read it, but it was the happiest experience I've ever had in the theater.
Now, what's interesting is that it comes, of course, from an already very established project. Auntie Mame had been around as a play on Broadway with B. Lilly, as a play in London. Ros Russell had made the film without the songs.
Correct,
Didn't you feel...
I cannot tell you how many friends of mine said, oh, it's too soon, Jerry. They will not accept another version of this. But I had to do it because I had a special love for the project, and I knew that songs like It's Today and Open a New Window and We Need a Little Christmas and If You Walk Into My Life would just pour out of this great larger-than-life character. And of course it didn't bother a soul that we did it, because we then found the great missing ingredient, which was Angela Lansbury.
Now, she had, of course, done musicals before, both on stage and screen, but not for quite a long while.
Not for a while, and not in a starring role. And this really is a starring role, and I think we're very, very fortunate to have the wonderful Julia Mackenzie, who I have been a fan of for so many years, in the title role on the BBC. I can't wait to hear it.
Now, you say the show was the happiest of your life. That's saying a good deal when you think of
It's
Hello,
saying
Dolly.
a good deal, because
why was it?
It was because there wasn't one moment of discord. There were fewer changes made when we were out of town with this musical than I've ever made before in my life. It just worked from the first preview, and all we really did out of town was cut about 10 or 15 minutes out of it because it was a little long. But when you have something that worked that totally, I'll tell you a secret. Angela and B. Arthur and I actually went to the movies in Philadelphia when we were supposed to be going through a rigorous and very difficult tryout period. We just actually went to the movies, and it was that kind of an experience. It was a love fest, let me just say that.
But coming after 2 years from Dolly, 1966 was Mame, there must have been a feeling that you had to live up to that tremendous Carol Channing hit.
Well, I'll tell you another interesting story. I decided when I got the assignment that I would not write a title song. I said, lightning doesn't strike twice, and the title song of Dolly was so phenomenally and incredibly successful because of the Louis Armstrong record and all of that, that I just felt, why try to compete with something that, really was kind of a miracle? And I refused to write a title song, and I wrote everything else from Mame, and there was no song called Mame. And at the very last minute, one of our producers, Bobby Fryer, came over to my then little apartment in Manhattan and said, I'm begging you to just try and write a title song. It would help us so enormously if you could. And of course he was thinking about how the title song of Hello, Dolly helped that show and is still helping it. So he was very persuasive and he was very dear. And I said, I'll try. If something comes out that I like, I'll let you know. And that night, I wrote Mame, just exactly as it's done on stage now. All the patter and all the different lyrics. I just had myself a wonderful creative evening, and I was just delighted with it because I actually did it as a spoof on the Old South. I mean, that song is not supposed to be serious. It's a very lighthearted spoof. I couldn't get the melody out of my head, so the next morning I called everybody together and said, I have something to play for you, and they fell out of their seats. And so the title song of Mame, which had an enormous success of its own with Bobby Darin record, I don't know if you know who that is.
Oh, yes.
But instrumentals, and Louis Armstrong did that song again. It was history repeating itself, and that goes down in history as the song I did not want to write.
Now, critics sometimes occasionally and unkindly say that your scores mainly consist of big anthems for big ladies on big staircases, and that the songs get repeated over and over again in the show till you know them by heart. But there is also a darker edge to Mame. There is the sense that this woman really can't live without that child, and a song like Boy with a Bugle suggests that her loneliness is really what drives her on.
All I can say to those people is listen to If You Walked Into My Life, which is Boy with a Bugle. Just listen to the lyric. Listen to the emotion in it. There was no such thing in Anti-Mame. There was never a moment of turning back and saying, would I make the same mistakes if I had this to do all over again? Mame, the musical, became much more poignant and much more identifiable, and not just a zany comedy, because of the score. We Need a Little Christmas is a very emotional moment. She's lost everything. And in the play, there's a very nice scene, but you can't get the same emotion out of an audience without music. When she begins We Need a Little Christmas, she clenches her fist and she decides that she's going to have it now because we need it now, because she's never been lower in her life. And those moments are very, very far from a lady descending a staircase. I do the glamorous songs because that's my style. That's why my shows are played all over the world. And if anybody wants to criticize that, I think they can have a good time. But here we are, 30 years later. Thursday is the 30th anniversary of the opening of Mame, and it's going to have this beautiful production on the BBC. It's going to be revived next year as a tour in New York. Mac and Mabel is in its 8th month at the Piccadilly and doing beautifully, and Caroline O'Connor has signed through the first of the year. So, you know, the last laugh is that the shows with the staircases and the glamour are shows that people like.
Who else, apart from Angela, have been your Mames over the years?
We had Ann Miller, you know, the wonderful MGM
Absolutely.
dancer. We had Celeste Holm, who was a delightful Mame. We had Janice Page, and I don't know if you know some of these ladies.
Oh, yes.
Jane Morgan. Lucille Ball did the film. She wasn't particularly right for it.
I was going to ask about the film. How happy were you with it generally?
I wasn't happy with it at all.
What happened?
To be very honest with you. It really must be sung and must be danced, and it should be played by an elegant lady who has fun sliding down a banister. That's why Angela and Julia are so perfect for the role. And Lucille Ball, who I adored, don't get me wrong, I thought she was America's greatest clown, but that's what was wrong. She wasn't an elegant lady who slid down a banister. That was just wrong casting. And she really couldn't sing it, and you can't really do a film like that. But I had no control over the casting of the film.
Is there now a different perspective on Mame? As you say, 30 years down the line, do we tend to see her differently from the first night audience on Broadway?
I don't think so. I think the beauty of this particular character and this piece of work is that it's forever. I think that I have friends in New York who have elegant townhouses, who give parties for all liberal causes, who are very, very much the same as Mame was all those decades ago. And I think everybody has an anti-Mame in their life. Everybody has a glamorous, madcap friend or aunt. And I keep on hearing people say, oh, my Aunt Bessie is really anti-Mame. And that identifiable thing that makes everybody feel that they know someone like that is one of the secrets of its longevity.
After Mame, you went into Dear World and then Mac and Mabel. It seemed as though you were, for a while at least, turning your back on those kind of very upbeat shows.
As an artist, you always want to experiment. You always want to go into different fields. And Dear World was really my way of saying, I'd like to do something really serious and really offbeat. And, of course, the Girardot play, The Mad Woman of Chaillot, is as far from Mame as one can get. And you want to know something? I adored working on Dear World. It wasn't the success that my first three musicals were, but I wouldn't trade a note of that score. In fact, I would like to redo it now because I think it's more pertinent now. It's really about ecology.
Well, apart from that, Jerry, what are the plans finally? What happens next?
Next, we're going to try the new version of Dear World out in some small, obscure theater where there are no prying eyes, where Jerry Lawrence and I can work on it and make sure that it's right. And then we would love to do a major production of it. I would love more than anything in the world for Julia McKenzie to do it. I shouldn't say that without having even told her that.
Do you know what the show's going to be?
I'm talking about redoing Dear World.
Oh, splendid. And then you've also got a plan to go with Angela Lansbury into television.
Now, what I'm doing right now, what I'm right in the middle of, is a lovely project called Mrs. Santa Claus that stars Angela Lansbury, and it's the first original television musical that we've had in this country since Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote Cinderella for Julie Andrews all those years ago.
And Steve Sondheim's Evening Primrose just after that.
That's right. But this is really an event in television because, you know, it's not a usual thing to have a new score written for this medium, and I decided that I'd reach more people in one night than I even do, you know, in 5 or 7 years of a long run. And that's my goal, is to reach, you know, the public. And it's a charming, charming idea by a man named Mark Saltzman. And it's all about the woman behind Mrs. Santa Claus.
Jerry Herman's Mame was, of course, the show that made a great Broadway star of Angela Lansbury. After a long film career at MGM, she was now only in her second stage musical. So how did she get chosen for what many still regard as the role of her life?
I'd started to sort of mix it and match it, as they say, and I'd begun to do theatre in 1957 and continued, really, and through the 60s, the early 60s, I did a play, and then I did my first musical, which was Stephen Sondheim's Anyone Can Whistle with Lee Remick, and we had a golden flop, you see. It ran for 9 performances in New York, but it was my initial entrance as a musical performer, and I was seen in it by Jerry Herman, who subsequently wrote Mame. And when his script for Mame was ready, he sent it to me in California, where I'd sort of returned with my tail between my legs after this dreadful disappointment of the failure of Anyone Can Whistle, which incidentally became a great golden goodie in the years. But Mame, when I read it, I said to my husband, I said, if I had written this for myself, I couldn't have written a more marvelous musical vehicle. This is it. I have to do this. Do you agree? It's going to mean me moving to New York, probably the whole family moving to New York, but it is such a wonderful part. And he said, by all means, yes, go for it, as they say. So I did, and Mame, of course, opened the doors to great Broadway stardom, which was fascinating.
You knew this was a great score, but there was still some kind of question mark over your singing. Did you, in fact, have to work very hard to get the role?
I had to almost grovel for it, really, because there were 2 directors involved. The first director didn't see me in the role, which was Josh Logan, and so I said goodbye to the show. And then the new director was installed when Josh was replaced, and that was Gene Sachs. And he wasn't sure. He'd never sort of directed a big musical. Well, he had done Half a Sixpence, actually, now I stop to think about it. But this was something else. So this was a different cut of cloth. So he wasn't sure about the casting of this marvellous role, you see. So he made me do 2 or 3 auditions, and I was going back and forth from New York to Los Angeles and back. And finally, I said to the producer, I said, look, tell me, is it yes or no? Because this time when I get on the plane to go home, I'm going to stay there and I'm not coming back anymore. I want this part desperately. Please tell me. So he went away and he consorted with his partners, and then he came back. I always remember him standing there in his raincoat, and I was staying at a hotel on Central Park South in New York with my bags packed, you know. And he said to me, he almost got down on his knees, he said, Miss Lansbury, I have the honor to invite you to play Mame. So it was like a fairy story. A happier woman you cannot imagine. I always remember going back on the plane with the script on my lap.
And, of course, a Tony Award soon after that. But after years of filming in California, how did she readapt to 8 shows a week on a Broadway stage?
It suits me very well. The regimentation, shall we say, of theatrical work, I like it. I seem to thrive on it. I feel very healthy. I enjoy looking after myself, and I love working for an audience. Consequently, it was the repetition of it never worried me, even though I did it for 2 years, 2.5 years I did Mame. It was a long run, but the show was such a sparkling, wonderful experience for the audience that the feedback to me was invigorating and exhilarating all at once, and I loved it. I got tired, and I had my moments, of course. Good Lord, we're all only human. But nevertheless, to be in a show like that is a very uplifting experience. Technique is what sees you through, and this is the thing that actors who understand what I'm talking about say, yes, well, of course, technique takes over. And it's very hard to explain this to the average, theatre goer. I think possibly in England we understand it better because actors are looked upon as technicians as well as personalities. They're not just personalities. We see the same actor playing a variety of roles, and we understand that he has been trained or has trained himself through experience and playing many roles to alter himself and to take on various characteristics that are different every time. And that's part and parcel of our stock in trade as actors. It takes a long time to build a kind of expertise. People sometimes say to me, how do you do it? And how do you become all these various characters? I said, it's my job. I'm an expert at that. That's the thing I do. And it's not extraordinary. It's what I was trained to do and what I've learned to do over the many years.
Angela Lansbury, and before her, the composer Jerry Herman, talking about the making of Mame. In a moment, we go over to the Hippodrome Golders Green for a brand new Radio 2 production starring Julia Mackenzie and David Kernan and Libby Morris. But tonight's recording is broadcast in special tribute to Margaret Courtenay and David Kelsey, 2 distinguished players who were greatly associated with our series of classic musicals. Margaret played Madame Armfeldt in A Little Night Music and Mrs. Higgins in My Fair Lady. She also co-starred with Ginger Rogers in the first London Mame. David Kelsey was a distinguished actor and director who adapted and played in no less than 8 of these recordings over the last 2 years. They will both be greatly missed.